In the 1910s, American forest science was a vulnerable side project operating on borrowed time and borrowed money. It consisted of scattered, low-budget plots run by isolated scientists who worked the woods in the constant hope that no one in Washington would notice their funding and cancel it. The work faced a constant threat from a conflict of pacing. The Forest Service was attempting to run on two different clocks at once. Administrators lived on a short clock. Their immediate mandate was operational: produce timber and sell grazing permits to hit this year's budget targets. The scientists lived on a long clock. A watershed study or a forest growth analysis can take 50 to 100 years before the data yields any meaningful results. The institutional flaw was simple: the scientists answered directly to the managers. This meant that if a scientist discovered a hillside was being dangerously overcut, the manager, whose annual revenue relied on those timber sales, had the power to simply defund the study and bury the problem. Environmental data was entirely at the mercy of operational politics. Under this system, long-term scientific truth was impossible to protect. This changed in 1928 with the McSweeney-McNary Forest Research Act. Led by figures like Earl Clapp, it was a legislative rescue mission for the scientific method. The act established a permanent legal charter that restructured the governance of American forest science from the ground up. It created a statutory firewall between research and administration. Science became a separate branch of the agency. Because science would now answer only to science, local land managers lost the power to silence inconvenient discoveries by cutting off a researcher's air supply. The act converted scattered, ad hoc labs into a recognized system of regional experiment stations, backed by a full decade of guaranteed, predictable appropriations. This guaranteed funding provided researchers with the institutional independence required to outlast short-term political and economic pressures. The act also brought order to the work itself, organizing all national forest studies into a disciplined framework known as the 6 lines of research. These stable categories included forest management, products utilization, protection, range, economics, and forest influences. Forest influences was the most patient category, dedicated to studying how tree cover governs watersheds and regional climates over generations. On the ground, the new funding launched the first systematic nationwide inventory of America's forest capital. In 1929, researcher Thornton Munger led crews into the Douglas fir woods to begin the task of literally counting America's trees, one plot at a time. Improvised guesswork was gone. In its place stood a synchronized continental-scale science engine. Decades later, those regional stations were still running undisturbed place-based experiments that had outlived the scientists who started them. This unbroken legal independence created a record of ecological measurements that provided a clear baseline for the entire planet. It was the forest influences line of research that eventually delivered a massive delayed dividend that no one could have predicted in 1928. Because scientists were allowed to measure the chemistry of the exact same hillsides for 30 years, they discovered that rainfall was up to 100 times more acidic than expected. The discovery of acid rain was only possible because the firewall protected the data collection long enough to separate the signal from the year-to-year weather noise. The science proved that industrial pollution was the cause. Today, our understanding of global warming and wildfire behavior relies entirely on these unbroken datasets. A century-long climate baseline cannot be retroactively reconstructed if it is paused or defunded for even a single season. If the chain of measurement breaks, the record dies. The McSweeney-McNary Act created the legal firewall that guarantees the survival of the data we need to understand a changing Earth.